All right, everybody, welcome back. This week we are going to be diving into the wonderful topics of political ecology and seeing how this links to environmental justice. So let's dive into it, right? What is political ecology, right? Let's go through again some origins and evolution, okay? So this week, week three or module three, we're going to be getting into the most powerful tools for understanding power in environmental justice, in environmental studies, and considering conservation issues, environmental conflicts, right? It is just, these are quintessential tools to have in your toolbox. But again, we are going to get back into some complex theories, so hang on, don't panic yet. But I want to start with this simple question, right? I'd like for you to think about, like, as we begin, think about an environmental problem, right? We do this a few times in this course, but think about a specific environmental problem in your community. Maybe it's air quality, water access, urban green space, or climate impacts. And is this problem experienced equally by everyone in the community, right? What might be shaping that, right? I mean, if we're talking about environmental justice and injustice, I'm betting the answer is no, right? And I mean, that insight, that environmental problems aren't, neutral, but affect different groups differently, is, exactly where political ecology begins and should sound familiar from when we were talking about environmental racism and some of the foundations of environmental justice. So, political ecology emerged in the 70s and 80s when researchers were really, unpacking that you simply cannot understand environmental challenges through just the study of ecological or biological sciences alone. Okay. Traditional approaches, they were, treating environmental degradation like it was just about trees being cut down or soil eroding or species disappearing, right? And these are important issues that shouldn't be neglected. But these political ecologists were saying, wait a minute, right? We need to ask some different questions, okay? The foundational insight was deceptively simple but very revolutionary. They, positioned that environmental change is always, and I mean always, socially mediated, right? This is where political ecologists are coming from. So when forests disappear, it's not just about the trees being cut down, it's because certain people had the power to cut them, while others did not have the power to stop them, right? That seems really simple, but it is actually quite powerful, right? Let me give you a little bit of a more concrete example, right? Early political ecology researchers, Piers Blakey, studied soil erosion in Nepal, okay? And traditional environmental science would focus on rainfall patterns, soil composition, farming techniques, what in the biological ecological system is contributing to this soil erosion problem, right? But Blakey said, I'm going to ask some different questions. Why are poorer farmers forced onto marginal hillside lands in the first place, right? This is a kind of a totally different way of thinking about this issue. How do global economic pressures shape local farming decisions, and who gets blamed when the soil erodes, right? What Blakey found changed, everything. The soil erosion wasn't caused by poor farming practice, as was kind of the anecdotal, incorrect accepted hypothesis. It was caused by an economic system that pushed these poor farmers onto lands that couldn't sustain agriculture in the first place, right? And then these folks were blamed, and those farmers were experiencing the environmental problems. They were being blamed for it in the first place, right? It was a very unjust cycle. This really showed how this environmental degradation example was the result of inequality rather than causing it, right? So since then, the field has evolved tremendously. Today's political ecology examines urban environments, climate change, as I mentioned, conservation conflicts, and of course, environmental justice. But that core insight really remains true. To understand environmental problems, you really must understand these power relations. And this is a key theme of this week and what we're going to be talking about in this and the corresponding lectures, okay? This matters because you, as future researchers and practitioners, right, this isn't just academic theory. It's essential for designing, proper, just environmental solutions that are actually going to work and not just continue to produce existing inequalities. Okay. So before we move on, I want you to, again, think about that environmental problem we discussed in your community and how might power relations be shaping that problem, right? Who has influence over the solutions and who doesn't? Jot down a few thoughts, and keep that, for your thinking throughout this discussion, so you can have that practical example to connect to. So moving beyond apolitical ecology, right? Don't get it twisted, not political ecology. We're talking about apolitical, right? And this is really why power matters. So what makes political ecology different from traditional environmental approaches is this distinction, right? It's not just academic, it fundamentally changes how we understand environmental problems and design solutions. Traditional ecology, or maybe like a hard sciences based, it's going to excel at understanding natural systems, population dynamics, habitat requirements, ecosystem processes. Again, these are important things we should understand. Interdisciplinary work is crucial. But these insights, they have a limitation. These traditional approaches are often going to treat social factors as an external disturbance that needs to be managed or controlled, right? So you get analysis that says, habitat fragmentation is causing species decline, therefore we need bigger protected areas, fortress conservation, right? The social part, like who gets displaced by the protected areas, this becomes a secondary management challenge rather than central to understanding the problem, right? Where this traditional approach is saying humans are here, nature is here, again, we're separating, right? Political ecology says, hold on, hold the phone. Those social factors are not external disturbances, right? They're the very processes that are producing the environmental outcomes. So let me illustrate with an example. Urban environmental justice in North America, right? So think about an urban heat island in, let's say, like downtown Denver, New York City, Chicago, where you've got a lot of concrete. Traditional environmental analysis may focus on surface temperatures, vegetation cover, building materials, right? How can we solve this problem through technical interventions? Remember, we talked about technocratic solutions? More trees, green roofs, better urban planning. This is all good, right? But the political ecologist is going to ask different questions. We're going to focus on environmental justice related questions. Why do low income communities and communities of color have fewer trees and more concrete in the first place, right? How do historical redlining practices shape contemporary urban heat exposure? Who has the political influence over urban planning decisions? This analysis reveals that the urban heat island or this inequality isn't just an unfortunate side effect of a lack of trees or poor city development. It's a predictable result of decades of racial discrimination, housing policies that have created this problem, and unequal political representation may all be, causes of this. So here's the crucial difference in scale analysis. Traditional ecology is often going to focus on the local ecosystem processes. Political ecology traces connections across scales, and this is powerful, right? From local resource use to global commodity markets. Take deforestation in the Amazon as another example. Traditional analyses might examine local like forest clearing patterns, soil impact, species loss. Political ecology is going to trace this to international demand for soybean, right? This may be driving national policies, promoting the export of agriculture, which is shaping local land tenure systems that's creating and concentrating ownership outside of smallholder hands, right? So again, same deforestation, completely different understandings of causation, and therefore completely different solutions. So here's something I want you to try. Pick an environmental issue, again, the one you talked about, maybe a different one, climate change, plastic pollution. Write down how you would explain this problem using a traditional environmental analysis approach, right? And what are the immediate physical causes? Now, try to reframe it in a political ecology lens, right? What power relations are shaping this problem? Who is benefiting from current arrangements? Who bears the costs? How do decisions get made about the issue, right? Notice how different these questions are and these analyses are, right? That is the power of political ecology thinking, and this is what you're going to apply in your activity related to power mapping this week. So, moving along. EJ and political ecology, right? They have a lot of convergence. They are supporting each other in many ways, right? And so we've gone over, the history of environmental justice. We've now, touched on a high level overview of the history of political ecology, but they developed somewhat independently, but they did converge around the same crucial insights about power and environmental outcomes. Environmental justice, as we mentioned, emerged from grassroots organizing in the 1980s and through the civil rights movement. And, this was, organizing on the ground. This is lived experience and environmental racism by communities of color. This movement really changed mainstream environmentalism's focus on solely wildlife preservation, right? And environmental justice activists argued, as we've mentioned, that environmental protection must address this social justice or it's going to keep producing these inequalities, right? Political ecology and environmental justice converge around this shared insight, right? Both recognize that environmental problems are never socially neutral. Both examine how environmental changes affect different groups unequally. Both challenge technical approaches that ignore political dimensions. Environmental justice scholarship identifies three crucial dimensions that we need to understand. Remember, we look at five, but traditionally it's three: distributional, recognitional, and procedural, right? And political ecology is similarly unpacking these concepts, right? That is not, none of these ideas are neutral, right? It's a power move that's going to privilege certain ways of knowing while marginalizing others. So you can kind of think about political ecology as it is separate from environmental justice, but heavily converging in the same way. And they draw from very similar thinkers and theories. And doing EJ work, you can pull from political ecology. Political ecology can pull from environmental justice and work that's been done in specific focal aspects, like those justice pathways, right? So, key concepts in political ecology to really differentiate this from environmental justice and give you a little bit more color and context. So, we understand where political ecology is coming from and how it connects to EJ, but let's examine these key concepts that guide the research, right? So, these are not just academic vocabulary, these are analytical tools that can really help us understand the complexity of environmental problems, okay? So, scale analysis recognizes that environmental problems operate across multiple spatial and temporal scales simultaneously, okay? And I know that this might sound abstract, but it's actually very practical. Think about food justice, right? In your community, let's say. At the local scale, you might observe food deserts, neighborhoods without access to fresh, affordable groceries, right? We're pretty familiar with hearing about those things, maybe in courses, social media, the news. Traditional analyses might focus on transportation barriers, store profitability, consumer preferences, kind of those traditional sort of economic measures. Scale analysis is going to ask, how do national agricultural policies shape what foods are produced and how they're priced, right? This idea of, a lot of us are not eating food that is produced in our local community. How are these global trade agreements affecting these local food systems? And how do federal housing policies, maybe this seems totally unrelated, but very related, concentrate poverty in ways that make certain neighborhoods unprofitable to grocery stores, right? The invisible hand of capitalism. Same food desert, but now you see how local problems connect to national and global processes, right? So that really changes your understanding of solutions. It's shifting this idea, right? Power analysis, which is critical to what we're discussing, it moves beyond simple domination models. It goes beyond just asking, all right, who's in charge, right? This is now going to move to examine how power operates through multiple mechanisms simultaneously. Power isn't just something people have and others lack, right? It operates through institutions, knowledge systems, economic structures, cultural narratives. Understanding these multiple power forms and being able to recognize them enables more strategic interventions and better analysis, okay? So returning to marine conservation, these fishing restrictions, they might be imposed by government agencies. This is an institutional power. It might be justified, as we showed in the qualitative data analysis module, through scientific knowledge, discursive power, saying that only scientific knowledge is being privileged, right? And it might be enforced through economic penalties or laws, right? Structural injustice, and implemented by individuals with enforcement authority, right? This is the actor power. So this is all operating at once. And this knowledge analysis is going to help us treat all knowledge claims as, I'm sorry, it's all operating at once, very complex. And so now moving on to knowledge analysis, right? That this treats all knowledge claims as partial and politically situated rather than neutral representations of reality, right? This doesn't mean that all knowledge claims are equal, but it does mean that we must examine how knowledge gets produced and legitimated, right? That's really important. This goes into recognitional justice right away. This should sound very, very familiar to you. Scientific knowledge, local knowledge, policy knowledge, traditional ecological knowledge, they all emerge from particular social positions and they serve particular interests, right? The question isn't, which knowledge is true. I want you to really think about that. We're not asking which knowledge is true, but rather we're asking whose knowledge is being treated as authoritative and what are the consequences. Do you see how we shifted that narrative? So here's a quick exercise. Think about a current environmental debate, maybe around renewable energy development and, just transition, right? If we're going to move to renewable energy, what jobs are going to be available for folks? And we could ask what different types of knowledge are being debated here, right? Scientific studies, community experience, economic analysis, cultural values, which type of knowledge are getting the most attention in media coverage or policy discussions, which are not being heard or marginalized, right? This is going to really point to these hidden power dynamics that often shape environmental decisions. Now, the nature society relationship often gets conceptualized as co production rather than external interaction. Humans don't just impact natural systems, we produce and participate in producing hybrid social natural systems, right? We participate in these systems actively as agents, right? I move myself to that globe. Urban watersheds, agricultural landscapes, even wilderness areas are co-produced through these social and natural processes. So justice analysis integrates environmental and social justice rather than treating them as separate issues, okay? Environmental degradation often results from social injustice, where environmental protection can reproduce or challenge social inequities, right? We've covered this a bit. These concepts provide the foundation for the theoretical frameworks we're about to explore, okay? They're not just academic ideas, these are practical tools for understanding and changing environmental problems, okay? So that kind of walked you through that justice agency change component of an SES. So moving on from, analysis to action, political ecology research, this is really why I love political ecology. It's not just analytical, it's transformative, right? It has the potential to transform, which in many cases, when we think about systemic injustice, this is some of what we need, right? So, political ecology research aims to change the world, not just understand it. I know that sounds kind of hyperbolic, but it's true, right? We're seeking change. We are being activist scholars, right? Research goals in political ecology include, revealing hidden power relations, challenging dominant narratives, supporting social movements, and informing policy alternatives, right? This is justice-driven research, right? If you want to make a difference through science, through community-based conservation, through environmental activism, you found a home here, right? Let me tell you, right? So let's share an example like from climate adaptation research, okay? So traditional climate science focuses on temperature projections, sea level rises, participation, precipitation patterns, etc., right? Climate adaptation researchers focus on infrastructure, technology, and behavioral change. Let's flip the script, right? Political ecology climate research asks, hey, who is most vulnerable to climate impacts and why? How do climate adaptation policies affect different communities, right? Whose knowledge gets incorporated into this adaptation planning in the first place, right? And how might this adaptation strategy reproduce or challenge existing inequalities? I worked on some of this research related to flood adaptation in New York State, where we unpacked a lot of these ideas and saw that there were a lot of folks who were being misrepresented and misunderstood based on identity, right? This is incredibly important to think about. These questions are going to lead to research that supports community organizing, right? You're going to empower community members to pursue more equitable adaptation policies, right? This challenges top-down technical solutions that are going to ignore local knowledge, and it might reveal more about climate impacts than we ever knew, right? How they're compounding existing environmental injustice, right? That they're connected, they're intersectional. Remember that term. We're going to come back to that in future talks. But this transformative orientation, this is shaping the methodological choices. Okay, political ecologists often employ multi-sided ethnography. Right, this is when you're studying a way of life, a community deeply. You're involved, right? And this is going to trace connections across scales rather than focusing on a single community. Okay. We can use historical analysis to reveal how contemporary power arrangements emerged through specific processes, right? Rather than just natural evolution. We can emphasize participatory research methods, which we're going to talk more about, that involve communities as research partners rather than subjects. This is something I feel very strongly about. This means communities will help define the research questions, develop methodologies, interpret findings, and use results for advocacy and policy change. We are going to go over how to actually do this step by step in a forthcoming video, but it's really important, and I really want to see this emphasized in your final projects. And I want to be honest about the challenges this creates, right? This is not easy, right? Studying power can be politically sensitive, potentially dangerous for both researchers and participants, right? Elite actors may resist research that challenges their interests. We've seen it. Marginalized communities may fear retaliation for participation. Political ecology research it also struggles with the tension between critical analysis and policy relevance, right? Revealing structural problems is easier than designing feasible solutions, let me tell you, right? I am constantly critiqued by colleagues that I'm very good at identifying the problems, that it's much harder to find the solutions, right? Being a critical scholar, it can kind of shape your brain in that way. So again, academic grant timelines, it's rarely going to match advocacy needs. And, research findings may support some community interests and it might challenge others, right? So despite these challenges, right, political ecology research has contributed to significant policy changes, supported successful community organizing campaigns, and influenced how environmental problems are understood and addressed. It's everywhere, right? The key is maintaining analytical rigor while remaining engaged with struggles for environmental and social justice, right? Remembering our positionality, sensitivity, ethics. And this foundation is really going to provide the context for understanding why the theoretical frameworks we're about to examine are essential tools for political ecology research in conservation and environmental settings. Okay. So I'm going to stop this first video, your kind of introduction, your primer to political ecology. And next, we're going to talk about power. Power, power, power. Awesome.